The year was 2014, and Hollywood still believed the worst thing that could happen before a premiere was a bad review in the trades. The studios glittered under the Los Angeles night, all glass doors, guarded gates, and posters 10 stories tall. Behind the glamour sat file servers, mailboxes, payroll systems, editing bays, and the kind of secrets that make lawyers sweat through silk. Sony Pictures Entertainment was getting ready to release The Interview, a crude little comedy with a dangerous plot point. In the film, two Americans are recruited to assassinate Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. Then the rain came down sideways. On November 24, 2014, Sony employees booted their machines and found something waiting. A red skeleton on a black screen. A message from a group calling itself Guardians of Peace. The machines were locked. The network was crippled. The thieves said they had stolen Sony's private data. They said they would release it unless Sony obeyed. By the time the smoke cleared, this was no prank, no simple ransomware job, no ordinary smash and grab. This was a nation-state walking into a movie studio with a crowbar in one hand and a match in the other. Sony Pictures Entertainment was not just a film lot with palm trees and famous faces. It was a global business with thousands of employees, production networks, intellectual property, distribution plans, legal records, contracts, human resources files, and executive communications. It made movies and television shows, managed unreleased content, and negotiated with actors, directors, unions, vendors, and theaters. In a town built on secrecy, Sony's servers were vaults. Scripts, screeners, budgets, salaries, and private emails all lived there, humming under fluorescent light. The security posture, as investigators later found, had plenty of soft wood behind the paint. Sony had been breached before, most famously during the 2011 PlayStation Network incident, though that hit a different Sony business unit. At Sony Pictures, the attackers found a corporate environment with broad internal trust, weak segmentation, vulnerable administrative pathways, and valuable credentials that could be harvested and reused. Like many companies at the time, Sony defended the perimeter better than the interior. Once an intruder got inside, too many doors opened with the same stolen ring of keys. The first step in the breach remains partly hidden in fog, like a getaway car with the plates wiped clean. Public reporting and government statements pointed to North Korean operators, commonly associated with Lazarus Group, also tracked over the years by names such as Hidden Cobra, Guardians of Peace in this operation, and later subgroups tied to Reconnaissance General Bureau activity. Investigators examined malware samples, command infrastructure, operational patterns, and overlap with earlier attacks on South Korean banks and media firms in 2013. The FBI said the tools, methods, and infrastructure linked the operation to the DPRK. North Korea denied it, but praised the result as a righteous act. The likely initial access involved the mix of spear phishing, stolen credentials, and prior reconnaissance of Sony's external and internal systems. Unlike a clean case built around one famous CVE, the Sony breach was not publicly tied to a single patch number that opened the front door. That matters. Not every cold case has a neat bullet with a serial number. The attackers appear to have gathered usernames, passwords, network maps, and server names before the destructive phase. They knew where they were going. They did not stumble through the place like drunks in the dark. They moved like burglars who had studied the building plans. Once inside, the attackers escalated and moved laterally through Windows infrastructure. Reports from incident response firms and malware analysis showed the use of legitimate administrative credentials and Windows management pathways. That is the old trick. You do not break every lock if you can steal the janitor's key. Tools and techniques consistent with credential theft and lateral movement were involved, including password dumping from compromised machines, reuse of domain credentials, remote service execution, and administrative shares. In operations like this, Mimikatz-style credential harvesting, pass-the-hash methods, PES-exec like remote execution, Windows management instrumentation, and server message block connections are the usual alleyways. Even when custom malware does the dirty work, it often rides on trusted protocols. The malware family used in the Sony attack included destructive wiper components, commonly referred to in reports as destover. It was designed for Windows systems and contained modules that overwrote data and damaged master boot records. In plain language, it did not just steal from the house. It broke the floors and set fire to the stairs. The wiper used hard-coded credentials in some samples, showing that the attackers had already acquired privileged access before detonation. It connected to internal systems, copied itself, and executed destructive routines. Some variants attempted to stop services, delete files, overwrite disk data, and make recovery painful. This was sabotage with a schedule. Persistence and staging likely came before the big reveal. The attackers spent weeks, possibly months, preparing the ground. Malware implants and backdoors were placed inside the network to maintain access. Command and control channels used compromised or attacker-controlled servers to manage infected hosts and move data. Public reporting identified infrastructure with links to prior North Korean activity, including IP address overlap and code similarities with malware used against South Korean targets. The attackers also packaged stolen data into archives for exfiltration. That means there was time. Time for alerts to fire, time for unusual traffic to show, time for someone to notice bulk movement from file shares, authentication from odd hosts, or administrative tools being used at strange hours. The exfiltration was broad and ugly. Unreleased films including Annie, Fury, Mr. Turner, Still Alice, and To Write Love on Her Arms appeared on file-sharing networks. Then came confidential documents, executive emails, employee social security numbers, medical information, salary spreadsheets, legal documents, contracts, password files, internal presentations. Some estimates put the stolen data at roughly 100 terabytes, though the exact confirmed volume remains debated. What is not debated is the effect. The thieves did not merely take the data, they curated it for maximum humiliation. They fed reporters, gossip sites, and the internet's hungry street corners. The attackers then shifted from theft and destruction to coercion. They demanded that Sony stop the release of the interview. In December 2014, messages threatened violence against theaters that showed the film, invoking the memory of September 11. Major theater chains pulled back. Sony initially canceled the wide theatrical release, then later released the film in limited theaters and through digital platforms. The operation had crossed a line that the industry had not seen in that form before. A foreign government, according to the FBI, had used cyber means to punish a private company over speech and to scare the public away from a movie. The detection failures were the kind that haunt a detective after midnight. A mature security program might have noticed large internal scans, credential dumping behavior, abnormal use of domain administrator accounts, unusual SMB traffic, suspicious remote execution, unauthorized archives being created, and outbound transfers to unfamiliar infrastructure. Strong endpoint detection and response tools were less common in 2014 than they are now, but even then, logs mattered. Domain controller logs, proxy logs, data loss prevention alerts, and NetFlow records could have told a story earlier. The problem was not one missing alarm, it was a chain of missed chances. The intruders had dwell time, and dwell time is oxygen. The fallout hit like a brick through stained glass. Sony Pictures shut down large parts of its network. Employees went back to pen, paper, personal phones, and old workflows. Internal systems were rebuilt. The company faced embarrassment, legal exposure, operational paralysis, and deep personal harm to workers whose private information had been dumped for the world to paw over. Published estimates of the cost varied, but Sony later said it expected around $35 million in investigation and remediation costs for that fiscal year, while broader damage estimates ran higher when business disruption, legal fees, security upgrades, and lost productivity were counted. The political impact was even bigger. On December 19, 2014, the FBI formally attributed the attack to North Korea, a landmark moment in public cyber attribution. The United States imposed sanctions against North Korean entities and officials in January 2015. The breach ignited debates about censorship, corporate resilience, cyber deterrence, and whether a movie studio could become the front line in a geopolitical fight. Executives suffered public humiliation from leaked emails. Employees suffered identity theft risk and exposure of private medical and financial details. The human toll was not limited to the boardroom. It fell on assistants, accountants, engineers, producers, and families who never asked to be cast in the picture. So what changed? The Sony case made it clear that destructive malware was not just a problem for banks, governments, or power plants. Entertainment companies, hospitals, schools, law firms, manufacturers, and local governments all hold data that can be stolen, weaponized, and used for leverage. It also proved that public attribution could become part of incident response. The FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and private researchers began sharing more indicators, malware reports, and threat intelligence tied to state groups. North Korean cyber operations did not stop. Lazarus later appeared in major cases involving Bangladesh Bank in 2016, WannaCry in 2017, cryptocurrency theft, and software supply chain operations. The controls that would have mattered at Sony still matter tonight. Network segmentation would have slowed the spread between user workstations, file servers, domain controllers, and production systems. Multi-factor authentication on remote access and administrator accounts would have reduced the value of stolen passwords. Least privilege and privileged access management would have made domain-wide compromise harder. Endpoint detection and response could have flagged credential dumping, suspicious remote execution, and wiper behavior. Data loss prevention, egress filtering, proxy inspection, and anomaly detection could have raised alarms during large outbound transfers. Regular offline backups, immutable storage, and tested recovery plans would have limited the blast from destructive malware. Frameworks like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CIS Critical Security Controls, MITRE AT&CK, and Zero Trust Architecture give modern defenders a map that was written in part with ashes from cases like this. There is another lesson, colder and simpler. Know what you have, know who can reach it, and know when it moves. Classify sensitive data, encrypt it, monitor access. Separate crown jewels from ordinary office traffic. Practice incident response before the wolves are at the door. Run tabletop exercises with executives, legal counsel, communications teams, and technical staff in the same room. Keep logs long enough to investigate. Hunt for living off-the-land behavior because the bad actors prefer your tools to their own. Verify vendors and remote access paths. Patch the known holes, but do not fool yourself into thinking patching alone solves a stolen credential problem. Defense is not a wall. That is the file on Sony Pictures, 2014. A studio built to sell dreams found itself trapped in a nightmare written by men with keyboards and orders from a distant regime. The city lights came back on eventually. The movie played. The network was rebuilt. But the case still sits in the drawer, smelling of rain, ozone, and burned magnetic tape. In my line of work, you learn that every secret has a shadow, and every shadow has a price. Stay sharp, keep your backups cold, and never let the keys to the kingdom hang by the front door.